Hey everyone, it's Ms. Lopez. In this video, I'm going to talk about lipids, the second macromolecule for chapter 2. Lipids are hydrocarbons, so they're made of carbon and hydrogen mostly. So they may contain a little bit of oxygen, but because they're mostly carbon and hydrogen and there's not that extreme difference in electronegativity, they are nonpolar, meaning that they're insoluble in water. When lipids are close together, they can be held together by those hydrophobic interactions, what are known as van der Waals interactions. But those are not true bonds. There's no sharing of electrons. They're just interactions. So lipids can store energy in those carbon to carbon chains and those carbon to hydrogen chains. And this is typically referred to as chemical potential energy. So energy is in the bonds themselves. And so typically we say that lipids are what we call long-term energy. They also play a very critical role in the structure of cell membranes. Those are called phospholipids, and we'll talk about those more in depth a little bit and then in greater depth in Unit 2. They also work, have the function that they're fat in animal bodies that serve as thermal insulation. You can also say that waxes will form a protective cuticle surface on plants to prevent too much water. And another important thing about lipids is that they can also include a class, or they can also include a type of molecule that are derived from cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is not, it doesn't have the same monomer as phospholipids or triglycerides when you remove their extra fatty acid chain, but they're still considered lipids because they are not soluble in water. And once you take that cholesterol, you can use it to form certain types of hormones. So what we call signaling molecules. These can be like testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, and those are all derived from cholesterol, which is a lipid and not water soluble. Triglycerides are what you call your simple lipids. They include your fats, which are solid at room temperature, and your oils, which are liquid at room temperature. And they have very little polarity, extremely hydrophobic, and they consist of 3 fatty acids. There's the three fatty acid tail, and then a glycerol backbone. That's where the glyceride comes from. And so in order to make a triglyceride, you have 3 condensation reactions, so the removal of 3 water molecules forming those ester bonds. Fatty acid chains can vary in length. So usually they can be anywhere from 16 carbons to 24 carbons, maybe even longer. In saturated fatty acid, all the bonds between the carbon atoms are single, and they are what we call saturated with hydrogen. In unsaturated fatty acids, the hydrocarbon chains contain 1 or more double bonds, and that causes a kink in the molecule and prevents it from being tightly packed together. So when you're looking and comparing these saturated to unsaturated fatty acids, that is a great example of how structure affects function. Let's take a simple hydrocarbon. Let's take a simple hydrocarbon, something like, let's say OH. Here's my first carbon, and let's just do C6. So 6 carbons, C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to do the same thing. C1, 2, 3. But here I'm going to add a double bond and showing it with 2 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so that's the difference between these two. Now, saturated fats are called saturated because they only have single bonds between those carbons, and they'll contain the maximum number of hydrogens around each carbon. Keep in mind that each carbon can have 4 bonds around it. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to put the hydrogens, and I'm going to try to fill those carbons, making sure that each carbon has 4 bonds around it. So since this one already has a bond here and a bond here, it's got space for 2 more hydrogens. So I'm going to add them. 1, 2. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. 1, 2. Same thing. On this last one, there's only 1 bond here, which means there's space for 3 more hydrogens. 1, 2, 3. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to count up my carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So I know that I have 6 carbons, so C6. H's, let's count our H's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then there's only 1 oxygen, so I'm going to write an O with no number beside it, means that there's only 1. So that is this molecule right here. The other molecule is what we call unsaturated. And with the unsaturated, I'm going to do the same thing, keeping in mind that carbon can only have 4 bonds on it. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But watch out with this one. 1, 2, it's already got 3 bonds, so I can only fit 1 more hydrogen. And I'm going to put it right there. This one also already has 1, 2, 3 bonds, so we can only put 1 more additional hydrogen. I'm going to put it on this side here. There is what we call nomenclature. There is a way to designate the position of the hydrogens if we want to talk about trans or cis fats versus trans fats, but we're not going to go into that much detail about them. We're just going to put them on opposite sides. If this is really interesting stuff to you, organic chemistry will be the best semester of your life. So this one already has the 3, and now I'm going to do the other 3. So let's go through and do the same thing. We know we have 6 carbons. Now let's count up our hydrogens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there's still only 1 oxygen. So that is the formula for this. And because of that double bond, it causes a kink in the structure of this molecule. So instead, this molecule is going to be a little bit different. Not that kinked. It's just going to be kind of offset with in position or in relative to the rest of the molecules. So unfortunately, I don't think I'm that savvy enough. I'll just kind of put it like this. There we go. So it's now got a little bit of a bend to it. And that creates problems because when the molecule tries to line up next to each other, this bend right here will prevent them from lining up perfectly. So because it's got a bend in it, it's going to create space in between the molecule. And so unsaturated fats behave different than saturated fats. Your unsaturated fats are like corn oil, olive oil. They stay liquid at room temperature. Saturated fats turn solid at room temperature. So think of stuff like bacon grease or butter, which has a lot of that saturated fat, and those will solidify at colder or even at room temperature. So fatty acids can also be considered amphipathic, meaning that they have a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic tail. And the classic example that we are going to talk about are phospholipids. So phospholipids are 2 fatty acids and a phosphate compound bound to a glycerol. The phosphate group has a negative charge in making that part of the molecule hydrophilic. Typically in 9th grade, what you guys saw when you saw phospholipids looked like this. And you learned that it was the head that was hydrophilic, and that's because of the negative charge in the phosphate group that's here, and then the tails were hydrophobic. And keep in mind that if any of these tails are saturated, if they have that double bond, or if they're unsaturated and they have that double bond, the tail actually bends and kinks, and that creates space in between the molecules so they don't pack together as tightly in the plasma membrane. So this is phosphatidylcholine, which is your typical, when you think of phospholipid, this is what, there are different types of phospholipids, but what you typically think of with the plasma membrane is this phosphatidylcholine. So you have your choline molecule up here, you have your phosphate, and in ninth grade, you probably just drew this as a big head, and then there are the hydrocarbon tails. But it's this phosphate group right here that is slightly negative that makes it that hydrophilic or water-loving head, and then the tails themselves are hydrophobic. I hope this video was helpful to you guys. Be sure to watch the rest of our series as we talk about nucleic acids and we talk about proteins. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.